But if you got your Bibles, I want to ask you to open up to Proverbs chapter 31. Proverbs chapter 31. Today, we're ending our summer series on the book of Proverbs. And over the last few months, we've been walking through the book of Proverbs in our series called Walking in Wisdom. And we've learned that wisdom, it begins, if you remember, with the fear of the Lord. And we've seen these two voices, these two women personified, both Lady Wisdom and Lady Folly, and how Lady Wisdom and Lady Folly are often competing for our attention. And we've talked about things such as how they compete for our attention in money or in the words that we use, the friends that we form, the relationships, the way that we interact with each other through our friendships and integrity in our work. And over again, Proverbs has shown us how we say to live as an expert at life. And today we come to the last chapter in the book of Proverbs, Proverbs 31. And this is not only the conclusion of this book, but it's also like the last word that's said here that ties it all together. Now, honestly, when I was thinking through this series, I almost chose not to end this way. Because if you've been going to church for a while, you've probably heard a message on this chapter of Proverbs. For a lot of you, before the series, it might have been the only message that you ever heard from the book of Proverbs. You probably heard it on Mother's Day or at a ladies' conference. Now, the last chapter, chapter 31 of Proverbs, is by far the most famous chapter in the whole book. But it's also one of the most disliked, or maybe better yet, misunderstood. If you go online and you search for the Proverbs 31 in a Google search or on YouTube, you're going to find an infinite amount of posts and videos on how to be a Proverbs 31 woman, how to find a Proverbs 31 woman, why you should be a Proverbs 31 woman, or how to make your woman a Proverbs 31 woman. And some of us, we love this chapter. And for many of you, it has been and provided encouragement and guidance and wisdom for someone to learn what it looks like to live out the principles that we find in Proverbs. Because remember, Proverbs is different from other parts of the Bible. It's called wisdom literature. And that means it doesn't always have promises. It's not if-then statements that you can just 100% always. It's principles that can guide your life. But Proverbs 31, although some people love it, has often been weaponized. It's been used to guilt women into not being the kind of woman that God wants them to be. And so maybe for you, it's been a source of guilt or shame. Or maybe it's been a way for you to compare yourselves against other people. It's often presented as a list of attributes that you should do if you're going to be a godly woman. It's kind of like a Pinterest board of womanhood, right? Like you do all these things and then you're going to be okay. But understand this. Proverbs 31 isn't a checklist. It's not a are you doing these things type of passage. It's a are you being this kind of person passage. And here's what I think might be new for a lot of us. Proverbs 31 is not just for women. Now, in my Bible that I had when I was in middle school, I still have it, it's at my house. In Proverbs 31, it has this little writing. The girls are laughing because they've seen this before. And it says right around this passage, written in the margin in my like 7th grade handwriting, I will find her. And I did, of course. But honestly, most of the time after I wrote that in there, when I came to Proverbs 31, or maybe you're doing the Proverbs 31 reading challenge like we've encouraged you to do, to spend every day read a chapter of Proverbs. There's 31 chapters. There's often 31 days in a month, so it's a great opportunity to read the chapter for that day. I actually talked with someone on the phone this week who said they've been doing that, and they missed a few, and I said, guess what? I have too. But so they've been doing that, and it's amazing how God speaks to them in situations that they're going through that day through what they've read from that. So I encourage you to do that. But often when I would do that, because that's a habit I've had, is to read the proverb of the day. When I would get to Proverbs 31, I would skip it. Right, because it's for the girls. And maybe you've felt the same way. But this passage isn't just for women. And it's not just for men to help them find a woman. Proverbs 31 isn't not about a godly woman, but it isn't just about a godly woman. Leave that up there on the screen for a little bit, because I know it's confusing the way I said that, but I want us to see that. Proverbs 31 isn't not about a godly woman. It is written about a godly woman, but it's not just about a godly woman. Proverbs 31 is actually the perfect ending to this book that we've been looking at, talking about two different kinds of people that are personified as Lady Wisdom and Lady Folly. So the title of this message I've titled is Living as a Proverbs 31 Person. Because this isn't just about women. How can we be a Proverbs 31 person? How can these 31 chapters that we've looked at that help us to understand what it means to live with godly wisdom, what does that look like? And Proverbs 31 is this amazing culmination of that, because it describes for us in pretty explicit detail what it looks like to be a Proverbs 31 person. See, Proverbs 31 is not a prescription of a godly woman. It's a description of a person who lives the life of Lady Wisdom. Now, if you remember, Proverbs began back several months ago when we started this. Dan walked us through the first chapter of Proverbs. Proverbs began with a father giving instruction to his sons about how to be an expert at life. And we saw how wisdom was personified as Lady Wisdom, and living an unwise life was personified as Lady Folly. And so here at the close of the book, we have a mother guiding her son, describing what Lady Wisdom looks like. So let's jump into Proverbs 31, starting in verse 1. This is part of the passage that we often skip, or you might not have heard people preach on before. Proverbs 31, chapter 1. The sayings of King Lemuel contained this message which his mother taught him. We're going to stop for a moment. We'll go ahead and just leave those passages up on the screen while we're talking about them. First of all, we want to ask, who is King Lemuel? Well, the reality is we don't really know who King Lemuel was. In all of the record of Israel history and even other kingdoms, there's no record of King Lemuel. So there's actually some speculation about this, and I think this is kind of an interesting thing for us to consider, is that many people believe, and scholars believe, that possibly this is a nickname or a pet name that Solomon's mother had for him, King Lemuel, which would make his mother, if you know your history, Bathsheba, a woman who knows a lot about what it looks like to often follow Lady Folly. She saw that play out in her husband's life, and sometimes in her own life as well. But there's something interesting about the way this goes on here, because she starts in verse 2. O my son, O son of my womb, O son of my vows, do not waste your strength on women, on those who ruin kings. You can almost hear the mother's tone here. It's like she's saying, what are you thinking? Which lends some credibility to maybe this being Solomon's mother talking, because although Solomon, as we've talked about this whole series, was the wisest man who ever lived, he did not always follow the ways of wisdom. And some of these things that we're reading here, his mother saying, don't waste your strength on women, on those who ruin kings. And she goes on and talks about some other vices that apparently maybe this King Lemuel had. That actually does line up with a lot of what we know about Solomon. So she goes on. She said, it is not for kings, O Lemuel, to guzzle wine. Rulers should not crave alcohol, for if they drink, they will forget the law and not give justice to the oppressed. Alcohol is for the dying, and the wise, and wine for those in bitter distress. Let them drink to forget their poverty and remember their troubles no more. Now, let's stop here for a second. Lemuel's mother is not saying, go ahead and just let the poor people drink, right? Let them become alcoholics. That's not what the point of this. She's speaking in sarcasm, right? Saying, wait a minute, you are a king. Don't act this way. This is for people beneath you, right? Once again, Proverbs is about principles, not promises. This isn't our take to say, okay, so if I'm not a king, I should go ahead and drink myself silly. That's not the point. And she goes on in verse Or verse 8, speak up for those who cannot speak for themselves. Ensure justice for those being crushed. Yes, speak up for the poor and helpless, and see that they get justice. Her point is this: you know better. Be better. You've had all these other chapters as your father has been pouring this wisdom out to you. You'll be able to read this and learn from this. And it's a mother's challenge to her son. What are you thinking? Be better. And then we come to the next section, the part we're mostly familiar with. And depending on what translation you have, it probably has a title at the beginning. It might say, a wife of noble character, or ode to a virtuous woman is actually what that would mean. And that's an interesting phrase. We don't use that kind of language very much today, but ode to a virtuous woman, the word ode, it actually means the path. We've talked about the path of wisdom all throughout the book of Proverbs. And this is saying, this is the path of a virtuous woman. And this next section from 10 through 31 to the end of the book, it changes in its construction as well. These first several verses, these first 9 verses were a mother speaking to her son, and now this is poetry. The last section of Proverbs 31 here is a poem. And it doesn't read that way quite to our language, because it's been translated from Hebrew, but in the actual original Hebrew language, this is what's called an acrostic. You might remember that from your days in school, that every first line of this starts with a letter of the alphabet, starting from A to their Z. They don't have exactly the same amount of letters as we have in our alphabet. But it's saying this basically: from A to Z, this is what wisdom looks like. From A to Z, this is what wisdom looks like. In verse 10 begins, the wife of noble character, who can find? She is worth far more than rubies. This phrase, a wife of noble character, maybe in your ode to the noble woman or noble character, the title, as well as that first verse, it's the Hebrew phrase, Eshtel Hayil. And I've probably said that wrong, but that's the best I can figure it out. Eshtel Hayil. And it means woman of valor. Woman of valor. And in the original Hebrew Old Testament, this is fascinating to me. Our Bible is ordered a little bit different as the New Testament was added, but the original Hebrew Bible, the Old Testament, this chapter is followed not by Ecclesiastes and the next wisdom literature, that's why it's put that way. In the original Bible, it's followed by Ruth. It's almost like saying, this is what it looks like to be a woman of valor. Ode to the wise person. And then it gives us this story of Ruth. If you remember, we studied Ruth several months ago, and Ruth is an amazing story of this woman who, if you really look at it, she personifies a lot of what we see in these next few verses, but not the details, which is, I think, the point of Proverbs 31. Because we actually see Ruth called this exact same phrase. Eshtel Hayil, a woman of valor. We see that in the beginning of the book of Ruth as Boaz describes her. And he describes her as a woman of valor before she had any money, before she had children. She wasn't married at the time. She hadn't done all of the things that we later learn about Ruth. And so we can see that it's not about the details of a checklist of being this kind of, or doing these kinds of things. It's being this kind of person. So Proverbs 31, verse 10. Who can find a virtuous and capable wife? She is more precious than rubies. This is actually a rhetorical question. Because as you're going to read about the Proverbs 31 woman, or in our case, the Proverbs 31 person, we're going to find that no one can live up to the standard. Remember, it's not describing a to-do list for women or for men. It's describing the character traits of a wise life. Someone who's lived with Lady Wisdom. One commentator put it this way: she embodies not one woman, but rather the desired attributes of many. So as we read these next few verses, regardless of how you've thought about these before, I want you to keep in mind, this is not a daily checklist for women or for people in general. It's a lifetime portrait of what it looks like to be someone who is living with wisdom. Proverbs 31, verse 11. Her husband can trust her, and she will greatly enrich his life. She brings him good, not harm, all the days of her life. See, the first mark of wisdom is trustworthiness. People can depend on this woman. Her word is good. Her character is consistent. See, trust is something that takes years to build and seconds to break. And when it comes to wisdom, one of the clearest signs that someone is walking in the fear of the Lord or owed to a righteous, wise life is that you can trust them. And so the first thing I want us to see is that a Proverbs 31 person is trustworthy. A Proverbs 31 person is trustworthy. Think about the most trustworthy person that you know. Keep in mind, I'm not saying trustworthy just like they can keep their word or they don't tell lies. Do you entrust them with things? The things that they're entrusted with, do they handle them with wisdom? Maybe it's a parent who always showed up for you. Maybe it's a spouse who always follows through. You know they're consistent. They're going to be there. Not just present, but they're going to work for the good. Maybe it's a friend who you know you can call at 2 a.m. and they'll be there. You have confidence that they're going to do the right thing at the right time in the right way for the right reason. Remember, that's the definition we've used of wisdom throughout this. You can trust them. They live and act with wisdom. A Proverbs 31 person is trustworthy. Now, on the flip side, we can all think of someone who we can't trust. The kind of person where you think maybe you have to fact check everything they say. Or they double back on their promises. Their word, it doesn't always mean what it should mean. Or maybe it's not even the things that they say. Maybe they just don't act trustworthy. When you see this woman here personified Lady Wisdom, we see that she's always doing the right thing, which of course is not realistic for all of us to always do the right thing. But a Proverbs 31 person is trustworthy. Proverbs 31 person lives in such a way that others don't have to wonder if you've got their back. Are they going to be there when they're needed? Can I trust them? So I want to ask you this question. We're going to ask 3 questions here as we look at Proverbs 31 person. Am I a trustworthy person? I don't mean just can you keep a secret. Are you a trustworthy person? Can people count on you? At home, do your spouse and your kids, do they feel safe? Do they know that you've got them? At work, do people know that you're going to follow through? That you're going to do what you said you're going to do? That you're going to be proactive in that? With your friends, do you keep your word? Are you that person that we all know, one of those people, right? That just says, yeah, let's go out, let's be there. And then they set a date and then they always back out all the time. Are you going to be a trustworthy person? A Proverbs 31 person is trustworthy. Goes on in verse 13. She finds wool and flax and busily spins it. She's like a merchant's ship bringing her food from afar. She gets up before dawn to prepare breakfast for her household and plan the day's work for her servant girls. She goes to inspect a field and buys it. With her earnings, she plants a vineyard. She's energetic and strong, a hard worker. She makes sure her dealings are profitable. Her lamp burns late into the night. This is a woman who apparently doesn't sleep, right? She gets up early, she goes to bed late, she's always working. Do you get the point? This is not a checklist to make us feel inferior. She makes sure her dealings are profitable. Her lamp burns late into the night. Her hands are busy spinning thread, her fingers twisting fiber. She extends a helping hand to the poor and opens her arms to the needy. She has no fear of winter for her household, for everyone has warm clothes. She makes her own bedspreads. She dresses in fine linen and purple gowns. Her husband is well known at the city gates where he sits with the other civic leaders. She makes belted linen garments and sashes to sell to the merchants. this sounds like a pretty busy woman. But she's not just busy, she's fruitful in a way that blesses others. See, wisdom multiplies and then it gives. And that's the point of what this author, this mother is sharing with King Lemuel. That a Proverbs 31 woman, a Proverbs 31 person is diligent and generous. Working hard. We talked about work a couple weeks ago, or actually it was last week, about working hard, about being a person who is diligent and generous in what we do. And the Proverbs 31 person personifies that. It's not a checklist for us to say, well, I have to get up early and go to bed late and I've got to do all these things. It's about being someone who is diligent and generous, who takes the resources they've been given and multiplies them, blesses others. It isn't just about being busy. See, we live in a culture that celebrates busyness, but it often forgets generosity. It is easy for us to be busy to accumulate things for ourselves, to maybe even try to live out some of the details of this Proverbs 31 woman here. But it's not just about doing these things. It's about being the kind of person who is diligent and generous in all that we do. You can be the busiest person in your office or in your home and still be selfish. You can make a ton of money and still have no margin to help others. I mean, think of a kind of person who always seems to make the most of what they have, no matter what that might be. They may not have much, but they're creative, they're diligent, they're generous. They're the ones who can stretch something, the dollar the farthest, or a meal to somehow feed everyone. It's Proverbs 31 wisdom right there, using what you have, not just for yourself, but for the blessing of others. I think so many of you fulfill this. There's actually a woman in our church that I think personifies this, of being someone who is generous and diligent in all that she has. I'm gonna say who it is, even though I think she might be embarrassed by this. But I think a great example of someone who is living as a Proverbs 31 person is Darlene Close. If you know her, you know that that is true. That she is diligent and generous in all that she does. Wisdom pours out of her in the way that she manages things, in the way that she is generous to others. And that's an encouragement for all of us to be that kind of person. I know so many of you live this Proverbs 31 lifestyle. So are you using what God has given you, your money, your skills, your time, not just for yourself, but for others? And wisdom asks this question: who is being blessed because of my life? That's what it means to be a Proverbs 31 person who's diligent and generous. Who is being blessed because of your life? Goes on in verse 25. She is clothed with strength and dignity, and she laughs without fear of the future. When she speaks, her words are wise, and she gives instructions with kindness. She can laugh at the days to come, it says. In other words, she doesn't live in fear. She's not panicked about the future. A Proverbs 31 person isn't worried about the future. They're resting in the present and resting in the fear of the Lord. They don't fear the future because they have another kind of fear that we're going to get to in a minute. The Proverbs 31 person is secure, and her words bring life. They don't lash out. They're wise with their words. We've seen that throughout the book of Proverbs. The Proverbs 31 person speaks wisdom. We can say it this way: a Proverbs 31 person lives in Christ-like confidence. They're not afraid of the future, even the unknown. A Proverbs 31 person has a Christ-like confidence. Think of the calm, steady person in your life. Someone who is calm and steady, even in the middle of a crisis. They don't panic. Everyone else might be panicking and fearing what's going to happen. But a Proverbs 31 person takes a breath, takes a step in, and can steady the room. It's someone who's a non-anxious presence. That's a psychological term that you probably heard maybe thrown around today. Someone who's a non-anxious presence. Now, I can attest to the fact that I need to grow in this area. Anybody who spent time with me knows that I'm often an anxious presence, but I need to rest in Christ-like confidence. It's not be someone who is concerned so much about the future, but rests in the present with their God. We all know what it's like to be around people who are an anxious presence. They spread panic, worry, and primarily negativity. And that kind of anxiety is also contagious, but so is someone who lives with Christ-like confidence. The family of this woman here, the Proverbs 31 woman, is blessed to live in an environment that's not full of anxiety because this person has Christ-like confidence. So I want to ask you this question. You might have heard this illustration used before. I've probably used it before in different passages, but are you a thermostat or a thermometer? Think about this, a thermostat or a thermometer. They are different, right? A thermostat controls the temperature of the room. It can help make it hotter, or in our case, all the time cooler, all right? A thermometer just tells you what's going on. The world's falling apart. Everything is going, but a thermostat looks at the temperature and can adjust it. That's living with wisdom. A thermometer just reflects the temperature of the room, but a thermostat sets the temperature. Wisdom sets the temperature. Wisdom chooses peace. Wisdom chooses faith. Wisdom doesn't choose fear, at least not the kind of fear that we often think of. It goes on in verse 27. She carefully watches everything in her household and suffers nothing from laziness. We've talked about laziness. Her children stand and bless her. Her husband praises her. There are many virtuous and capable women in the world, but you surpass them all. And my favorite verse, charm is deceptive and beauty does not last, but a woman who fears the Lord will be greatly praised. Reward her for all she's done. Let her deeds publicly declare her praise. Charm is deceptive and beauty does not last, but a woman who fears the Lord. We've seen this all throughout the book of Proverbs. This description of lady wisdom and lady folly. In surface level attractiveness, whether you're a girl or a guy, right? Whether it's physical or otherwise, it doesn't last. But what's really deep within someone is what matters. The wisdom that comes out of them when they're pressed, when they're squeezed. 1 Samuel 16:7, we hear this story. People are trying to pick a new king. And the Lord said to Samuel as he's faced with all of these young men there, he says, don't judge by his appearance or height, for I've rejected him. The Lord doesn't see things the way that you see them. People judge by outward appearance, but the Lord looks at the heart. Wisdom is not about what's on the outside, it's about what's on the inside. And see, the fear of the Lord is the root of wisdom. Proverbs begins with the fear of the Lord as the beginning of wisdom. We saw that our first week. And it ends here with the same truth, that the fear of the Lord is the root of wisdom. Proverbs 9:10 says, fear of the Lord is the foundation of wisdom. Knowledge of the Holy One results in good judgment. Or Proverbs 1:7 that we've already read, fear of the Lord is the foundation of true knowledge, but fools despise wisdom and discipline. Everything that we've seen, how we use our words, how we handle temptation, how we use the resources that are entrusted to us, how we treat others, the kind of relationships we have, how we work, how we manage our time, it all flows out of the fear of the Lord. We're like a tree being planted. And its roots, the visible fruit of that tree, trustworthiness, generosity, peace, all the things we even see personified here in Proverbs 31, it only grows because of the roots that are beneath the surface. And the roots are the fear of the Lord, recognizing that God is in control, that all that I have is because of him, and all that I desire should be because of him. Without roots, the fruit, it doesn't matter what it looks like, it's not going to taste well. So ask yourself, am I rooted in the fear of the Lord? Is he the source of my wisdom? Or am I trying to manufacture my own life? See, Proverbs 31 isn't a guilt trip, and it's not a checklist. It's an invitation. It's an invitation to live out a life like this for everyone, not just the ladies. This isn't a picture of the day in the life of a wise person. So I got to make my schedule like this. It's a lifetime of someone who's walking like Lady Wisdom. Someone who's doing the right thing at the right time, in the right way, for the right reason. That's wisdom. That's Lady Wisdom. That's a Proverbs 31 person. It's a picture of a life who's lived with the fear of the Lord. Now, as we come to the end of this series on wisdom and in this final chapter of Proverbs, we've seen a picture of what it looks like to live a wise life. But I want us to leave remembering this. The Proverbs 31 person lives with wisdom, not perfection. This isn't about being perfect. It's about being wise. It's not about doing it all or being perfect or checking every box. It's about living in the fear of the Lord, walking in wisdom, reflecting the character of God. And let's be honest, we can answer just the same way that this mother did. A virtuous person? A wife of noble character? Someone who is living in the path of wisdom? Who can find? The reality is none of us will ever reach that perfection. We fall short. We lose our patience. We speak without thinking. We chase the wrong things. That's why we all need grace. And that's why we need Jesus. In a moment, we're going to share in communion together. This is a reminder for us that we are not perfect. That we are not perfect. But we're pressing on towards being a person who is living with the fear of the Lord. And we're able to do it because of what's represented in these cups and in this juice. We're told in 1 Corinthians 1:24, but to those called by God to salvation, both Jews and Gentiles, that's all of us, male, female, all of us, right? Christ is the power of God and the wisdom of God. He is the wisdom of God. He lived the perfect life of wisdom that we could never live, and he laid down his life for us so that we, maybe not on this side of eternity, could be the perfect Proverbs 31 person, but we're working towards that. And he has allowed us, through his sacrifice, for us to be made perfect. Today, as we take communion, we remember that our hope isn't in how perfectly we live out the whole book of Proverbs. Our hope is in the one who fulfilled wisdom perfectly on our behalf, who was the perfect example of Lady Wisdom, and invites us to be shaped and to be grown into the kind of person that he is, filled with wisdom.